Welcome to Telegeography Explains the Internet, the show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and today my guest is Pascal Menezes, CTO at MEF. Pascal joined me on the podcast about a year and a half ago when the show was much more laser beam focused on corporate networking. So this was, in part, an update on the progress MEF has made with their WAN-oriented initiatives around things like SD-WAN and SASE. We hit a lot more than that in this round, though, covering most of what MEF is working through with their members. So we talked about MEF's progress and carrier adoption of Lifecycle Service Orchestration, Sonata and Cantata APIs, the status of their work on APIs, and a little bit on how they operate with that, and how that leads to enterprise network automation as well. So it was a great capstone for our last episode with Orchest that came at a lot of these same issues, but from the carrier perspective. Pascal is able to offer us the perspective of the MEF as an organization working across many different types of their members and how to actually put all of this together into services that can really help carriers do their business. So Pascal is an enthusiastic and knowledgeable guest who has a deep background in networking, so I won't delay us any further. On to the interview. All right, welcome back to the show, Pascal. Last time you were here, we had a different name, but really same idea, and it's great to have you back on the show.
Well, thank you, Greg. I really appreciate having MEF and myself back. I know it's a great show you put on, and very excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So it has been a while. I just looked this up. It was July 2021 when you were on, and we've certainly gotten more and different listeners since then. So I wonder if you could just kind of give everybody a brief background on yourself and MEF once again, so that we can all start out on the same page.
Yeah, so MEF started in 2001, really transforming the LAN Ethernet into the carry Ethernet world, which is now an $80 billion market. So think of LAN Ethernet going across the wide area networks, interconnecting all the carriers worldwide. And that's an 80 billion plus market and continues to grow. That technology is well established. And now MEF I came in 60 years ago as a CTO. And basically we have moved MEF to automating, everything's about automating to be cloud-like. So all automations and going up the stack beyond, transports of Ethernet, so on. So SD-WAN, as you know, SASE, Zero Trust, edge computing, slicing, all of those are service definitions that we're taking on. And then automation cuts through all of that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great setup, because that's what I want to hit first here, is to kind of bring us up. As it happens, my last episode was with Jeremy Villalobos, who I met at a MEF event and sort of gave the carrier perspective, especially from the Latin American region, on why automation was so important. But now we're going to get deeper into what MEF is doing and what that means from a sort of standards and technical standpoint. So I wonder if you could kind of just start with introducing us to LSO, what LSO means, and what it does for the carrier community.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. So look, Lifecycle Service Orchestrator means LSO, is the whole idea that automation has to have this service orchestration model that basically allows an operator to not only, when services are being deployed from a customer demanding it or going into a portal or an API and asking for it and buying it and so on, it has to then be realized through machines, not people, to configure it, provision it, test it, and so on. And that's within a provider's network. But what we found was that providers have a great network and they have a great footprint of certain loops in their regions. But a lot of times the customers are not thinking about it just in their region. They're multinationals or large enterprises. And they basically say, I want you, Mr. Service Provider, to represent all my places across the planet. And so now we get in the problem, how do we automate those transactions between providers? So provider that was selling to, let's say, a customer has to now go to a whole set of wholesale partners across the planet and figure out who's got the connectivity for the certain site,
Right. It's
So,
something we talk about on the show a lot, that if you're a multinational, there's almost no chance that you can actually get network from one single provider. I've never seen it. Right. So even if you're not a multinational, even if you're, say, a U.S. domestic company, the tail at a lot of your sites, even if you're in major cities, is going to be owned by a different provider. So you're talking about breaking through that barrier to get all that service provisioned across an entire network end to end.
That's correct. And so the idea is the customer will have some retail relationship to one provider, and he's the one-stop shop, he or she, company. And they then represents how to plug into the whole back ecosystem across the planet to realize those connections without, actually having to make the customer or the enterprise do all that.
Right.
So that's really the value. And so all that has been done in paper and, all kinds of ways. And now we have an automation way. There's proprietary APIs, but if you do proprietary APIs, then you have to build a new API for everybody you're trying to connect to in the ecosystem. But we've come up with a standards API that's highly interoperable, highly high fidelity, high interoperability, and high extensible. And it's called the Sonata Interlude APIs, and it's designed for the ecosystem. And it's really powerful, and we get tremendous adoption. And it allows the retail operator to go and query all of their partners on the backside, their wholesale, and say, hey, for this service, I'm looking for Ethernet or internet or, certain types of, it could be edge compute, it could be power and space. And then basically the wholesale ecosystem comes back and says, yeah, I have it. Here's the price. And then if they want to buy it, then they order it, and then it updates all the inventory. And then from there, it's all about service provisioning it, and then testing it, and then operating it to make sure it's performing right. And then if there's a fault, and it manages the fault. And then if there's a fault, it goes to a trouble ticketing process that's all automated. And then from trouble ticketing, they finally do invoice and settlement. So it's a full life cycle of how the workflow should happen from all commercial aspects to operational aspects.
And automating that essentially so that it can flow seamlessly rather than being interrupted by lots of humans doing something with a spreadsheet or worse, a fax or something, right? So, yeah,
you're spot on, Greg. It's really meant that the customer interacts with a portal or a machine that represents the customer's requirements or interacting with the service provider with APIs. And they're describing what they want, just like the cloud. Here's what they want as services.
Right. So we've all become used to that in cloud services, where you can spin up a server, spin up an application, whatever, through a portal, pay for it, through that portal, maybe even for only a specified period of time instead of a multi-year contract. It's bringing that to networks, essentially.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when they do all of that, it has to hit their own service providers' retail systems, and they might find things that they can't do, and they have to rely on partners. And so now, how do they do that? In the past, if they have fully automated their own networks, that's fine. But if there's a dependency on a partner ecosystem, then they become the slowest link in the food chain.
Right.
And so if they take 3 months, that's the experience of the enterprise user, the enterprise administrator. It's like, oh my God, like certain sites came up right away, and some are taking 3, 6 to 9 months. Like that's not a good experience on a cloud-like experience. So the automation APIs are to try to move that so it's all machines involved end to end. And so literally you can turn up any parts of the geography at like almost near time speed. So.
Right. And Pascal, I have to ask, because we were talking before the show started, for those who catch a little snippet of this on video, the main show on audio, but we do little snippets on video. We're both surrounded by guitars. We're both tech guys by day and musicians by night, right? So did you have a hand in naming all of this? You have LSO Sonata, LSO Cantata, right? It's a very musical theme. Can you take us through the analogy and why that works so well?
Actually, I had nothing to do with it.
Really?
I came in, it was already done. So there was a framework architectural document that was put together well before I came in. And I don't know why they picked musical terms, but it came sonata, interlude, they're all musical terms. And I
Right.
was like shocked. I said, okay, cool. I don't think many people knew I was a musician, but yeah,
Yeah.
it was just serendipitous.
But it works in the theme of getting everyone to play in the same key, right?
Yeah.
To be able to and the orchestration concept of making sure everyone is in tune, everyone is on the same beat, all that kind of thing, right? Just doing that through automation.
Yeah, I think orchestration, they think about an orchestrator, in a
Hmm.
band. So I think
Right.
they use that analogy. But yeah, it's worked out really well. That framework's been in place 7 years and is still
Hmm.
being used all the time.
Excellent. So when, like I said, I had Jeremy, who represents a MEF member from a carrier. That's how you guys operate. Is that carriers and vendors for these various services become members, contribute to this, work together, collaborate, so that it can work with each other more fluidly. Pascal, I'm sure you do this a lot. So how do you argue to the carrier community that they should be a MEF member, and what do they get out of participating in your quarterly meetings and as a member of the organization?
So it's really simple. The world has changed a lot. It used to be that the telecom providers kind of owned the accounts, gave the experience, and it was site to site and site to data centers and the applications in the data centers
Hmm.
and some peer to peer applications. But the world has completely changed radically,
Yeah, yeah.
where it's all about cloud technologies and the destinations clouds. And the clouds are very sophisticated clouds doing all kinds of SaaS, IaaS, PaaS services, and now moving into digital transformation kind of services, AI/ML,
Hmm.
and IoT analytics. And so it just goes on and on. Um, so, so really important what we've done in MEF is we've just realized that this shift has caused, a very different change in mindset. And
Hmm.
what we realize is that if that's the game, that's where it's moving to, and everything's a cloud, then we have to really bring in the right services and automation to get us to the clouds.
Right.
And so it's not connecting site to site, site to data center anymore. I mean, of course, that's part of the hybrid
Hmm.
model,
Hmm.
but clouds have to be part of that connection.
Right.
So I'm not sure if I answered your question. So
Well, I mean, yeah, in terms of like what you would actually say, but that's a sort of like if a carrier is saying, well, why do I need to work on these kinds of standards? What's in it for me, essentially, right?
well, the thing is, if they don't get involved in this standardization effort, they're going to be
Hmm.
left behind. Because
Right,
what's going on is the hyperscalers are expanding out with their edge compute,
right,
right?
right.
And so they'll be in every city, and so will they get to every building? They could, because they could, look at Outposts. It goes to the building of that customers with Amazon's Outpost or AWS. So
Hmm.
look, the bottom line is as closer as that cloud comes to the customer or the nearest point of that city or region or locality. Um, the bottom line is that there's only one hop to that cloud now. So, and that could be just a
Right,
local internet loop. So
right,
then,
right.
so I basically tell the story to all the vendors that sell to the telecom providers. I basically tell the story to all the service providers in the world. I say, all that's going to happen is you're going to be a bit pipe to the cloud guys if
Hmm.
you don't get involved and create more value in this ecosystem. And not that like the cloud guys don't want you to create it. Every hyperscaler wants the telecom industry to be part of that journey because
Right.
they need them. They need them as a channel. They need them because they can't scale. There's too many enterprises, SMBs. And you know what telecom providers do, especially ILEX in that region, they have a lot of trust with their customers. They've been doing it for telephony and
Hmm.
data and voice, and they know their customers well. They can scale. They have got tremendous scale capabilities. They might not move as fast, but that's okay. But they're getting moving faster with automation.
Hmm.
But hyperscalers need them for their channels, and
Right.
the hyperscalers I think will give part of that value to say, hey, you provide the telecom, you provide the connectivity, you provide that overlay SD-WAN for intelligence, and maybe you provide that cloud security SASE, and we'll take on the rest, because the rest is like really complicated applications, So that's how I say it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes sense. And I mean, certainly you raise a point that has been on the minds of carriers that I've talked to for the last 15 years, right? Which is that I don't want to just become a commodity. And so this is another step of helping through automation, this be a service that the end users really need, rather than just a dumb pipe, as it were, to a hyperscaler, right? So what has been the traction to date? So, so how well is this being adopted by the carrier industry, and sort of how far along are you in creating these standards and APIs and whatnot?
Oh, we've got tremendous adoption, and it keeps growing rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
So we have about 105 that we've talked to providers. First of all, we our membership is 130 service providers,
Mm-hmm.
and the rest we have in vendors and integrators, and so we have 200 plus members. And then from the providers we've talked to, 105 of them, there's probably about 84. I don't have the number in front of me, but 84 that are in some shape or form in either deployment, ready to deploy, testing, planning, business cases, or still evaluating. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I know we think don't quote me, I think it's like 20 plus that's in production, and it grows continuously. And everybody's seeing the value that, the most important value is everybody plug in, federate, syndicate, federate, plug in. And basically, it's like what Kubernetes and clusters, Kubernetes and containers did. You build once and you deploy everywhere, right?
Right. You don't have to rebuild it at all your POPs all around the world. Once it's out of the lab, you can deploy it across your entire network. So.
Yeah, and with ours is that you can do this for Ethernet. You can do the full life cycle of automation for Ethernet. You can do it for internet. You can do it for pizzas if you want to. If you're selling pizzas, it doesn't matter. But the point is, it's fully automated. And that's the point you want to get to, is that all of this is machine to machine automated. It gives you that cloud-like experience from the time the customer interacts with your portal or machine, and it goes all the way across not only the provider's network, but all the ecosystems. And it's a very powerful value, and everybody's realizing that's where the market has to go. Again, I think the fact is, if providers don't come together and look like one big gigantic network, which they've already done it with the Ethernet, carry Ethernet in the night plane. They've connected, at 10 gigabits, 400 gigabits, 40 gigabits. They're all been connecting together at very large capacities, but that's not being automated. So now, how can they automate all of their interconnections that's in place, that makes a huge global network all the way to the loops, even last long, and then connect it in a way that it's one big federated network that looks like one big, like the internet did, for the consumers. The businesses can say, oh, I don't really care what destination is. I can get it anytime. I mean, the ideal world is because it's fully automated end to end with all the carriers, and they're already connected at the data plane level. So that is the essence of what we're trying to do, and we're getting very much success because everybody's getting it. So
that's a really interesting way to put it, and I've heard a lot about this, right? But I've never heard it quite that way. That in a sense, this is like building internet protocol for private networks in that sense, that you can get to any destination across private networks the way you can get any destination across the public internet.
Yeah, think about the destinations are business kind of oriented.
Right.
Flows.
Hyperscalers, and then end user.
I mean, look what's going on right now. So you say people are using the internet, and they go, I can go to any hyperscaler through the internet, but that's not what people do. They do that for things that don't matter in applications, for cloud-like applications.
Not enterprise grade services that need security and privacy and all that.
Yeah. So what's happened in the enterprise grade is you've seen these middle mile or these interconnect players come in, right? What do? They say, oh, I will bring you onto my on-ramp closest possible to you, right? And then from there, I have a huge backbone then that connects to all the clouds, all the multi-clouds. And so all of a sudden now we call them the middle mile player, or these interconnect providers, I won't name them, are creating, saying, well, you take the internet just one hop, and then you come onto my high-speed backbone that's really high quality. I'll get you all clouds. So you'll have a great experience to the clouds, right? Versus the internet all the way to the cloud. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, so this is what I mean describing is that not only do you want to think about it as a middle mile player, but now as you get onto the middle mile or the first hop, you want to create a bump in the wire services like cybersecurity, like hope, um, like maybe you put edge compute in there too, so you can do certain things. So there's some opportunity to go beyond bandwidth, is what I'm saying.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Not just bandwidth on demand, but the sort of, I mean, we end up talking about this on the show a lot, but in this show, the word is too capacious. But network as a service, right? So, yeah. On that note, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about enterprise automation. So, your members are from the carrier community, and I should say, 130 members. Well, the 105 carriers. You said 85 of them in some stage of deployment. That's a really big chunk of the larger multinational. Obviously, there's thousands of small service providers when you include ILECs that have a reach of maybe a few tier 3 cities or whatever. But certainly 85 carriers is a big chunk of the international sort of business center kind of reach there. But they're all doing this for the purpose of serving mostly enterprise customers, right? So, what does this look like? What does automation of all of this do for the IT infrastructure team who's not in the telecom business, but just a consumer of network?
Yeah. So are you asking what's the role in automation enterprise?
Yeah, like so to put it more succinctly, maybe what is the end goal of this automation on the carrier end in terms of a product or a service that gets used by the enterprise IT infrastructure team?
Yeah. So what's going on is the idea is that how can the enterprise program the network?
Oh, yeah.
And so really you have to think of enterprise is not IT administrators; they're developers. So in their
Right.
code, they write code, especially in Kubernetes, right? And they write microservices code in a Kubernetes deployment. So what they can do is write, little programming codes that basically influences the network and calls
Right.
back to the network and says, I need this quality of service or this slice. And basically, of course, they have to have pre-provision from business level for the contract side. But then they can now, in their code, describe the treatment they want of that service, of their application on the network. I'll give
Right.
you a simple example. It's a very powerful idea, though, and so you're seeing slicing come up. SD-WAN can it influence any of those policy decisions? Because now you have to have some administrator set up the whole policy and how they want, what application to get what performance, but it's all preset by some person, an administrator. What you want
Right.
is a developer to basically just, if the network's programmable, right, then the developer can, with rights and commercial agreements, can go pick what his experience has to be of the application because he's the one who knows the best what he
Right.
wants. And then the network you know, tries to live up to that and tries to do its best to optimize itself to always make sure that happens. That's really what we're seeing with self-optimization networks and closed-loop automation is basically it's this idea that it's programmed in, and this is where the world is going. 5G is all about that. It's how can we
Right.
how can we make the 5G super programmable to anybody's needs, and so slicing has been a big huge role. We're seeing edge compute. There are many areas of this that we're seeing that I think with 5G you can do it with wired too, but it basically allows the network to be programmable. That's the takeaway.
No, that's really interesting because I mean, certainly from the enterprise perspective, for a long time, it's been the case that there's in the traditional MPLS or even before that frame relay ATM private lines, there's a network and your applications run over that, and everything that your carrier can provide for you, like SLA wise, is attached to just the network, and the applications are just a layer above that. In a way, it seems to me that we're getting to that point where they've really been looking for of like I can have a slice of the network, if you will, that's designed for my application, and then the SLAs are really sort of tied more to my particular application than just a a network that I have a bunch of applications on. It's all very application specific. Is that a realistic sort of end game of all of what you're working on?
Yeah, and I'm sure there's many more use cases than just performance, but
Of
yeah.
course,
I mean,
yeah.
even think even like if we get SASE and cloud security and as part of that, could they define what kind of security postures they want? You know, that's all possible too. I mean, programming the network doesn't have to be about performance, because we're seeing now, network as a service, we probably should talk about, is really now the combination of as a service utility, whether it be subscription based in a pay as you go or monthly kind of bill. The whole idea of network service, it's bringing together networks and security together with multi-cloud
Right.
and hybrid cloud, multi-hybrid edge cloud. And all of that comes together in a nice package, all automated together, working together in a nice big ecosystem. And that's kind of
that's a great point. Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
no, that's what MEF's actually going into now. We'll be launching
Right.
next year. So
Okay, yeah. So let's definitely talk more about that because as a network as a service certainly comes up all the time, and one of the obvious focus on that is exactly what you mentioned, a different in the way we do network contracting. For example, there's that sort of business side that I can get network on an hourly basis instead of a 5-year major contract that I undergo with a big RFP process, but also bringing the security side of the IT infrastructure house into the networks team, right, and unifying that. So I think a few years ago, MEF sort of recognized that needed to be a part of this whole equation. What have you guys worked on with those overlay services? So we could probably start with SD-WAN and then add SASE on top of that. But what are the MEF standards around SD-WAN, and how has that evolved into SASE?
So okay, so we've released 2 versions of SD-WAN. We're on our 3rd version of SD-WAN. That was a service definition, and now we're actually doing an interop for SD-WAN. So you can have different vendors plugging into different SD-WAN's equipment, and they actually have interop, which has never been done. That's the data plane, control plane, management plane. So that's called our universal SD-WAN work. Then from there, we just released our first standardization of SASE. So that just got released 2 weeks ago in Miami. The board approved it. It was 2 years in the making. And we just released the first zero trust framework that really describes how zero trust works and can be applied to any service, including
I was
SASE.
going to say that those are particular services that cry out for service definitions, right? Because there has been a fair bit of what you might call SASE washing or whatever over the last couple of years since that standard kind of emerged as the next security posture that enterprises needed to think about. But you guys have worked on sort of laying out clearly what exactly SASE is. Can you give us a little bit of that definition? I think that's something that I always want to hear how that has coalesced.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the biggest problems in the industry, we did this with Carrier Ethernet, we did this with SD-WAN, is the terminology, the vocabulary, the construct. If everybody can understand what you're talking about, then at least you get into some common language.
Right.
And so we did that. That's part of the bulk of what SASE version 1 talks about, a SASE uni and a connection point and actors and all that kind of stuff. So we all get the same page of like these constructs and how they come together in a framework and all that. So that to me is fundamentally the basis of what people want to understand first.
Right.
Then it describes some policies, but the policies are, this is version 1. So, it doesn't cover everything. It just describes security functions, but the security functions are taken off as more atomic functions that, like a firewall is built out of, a bunch of atomic functions. So they describe the atomic function. Then what I'm trying to do is get them to describe now how these atomic functions build a next gen firewall or CASB. So so version 2 is already being worked on now. We just released version 1. And we're bringing a lot of the members that, on our board and our tab, our technology advisory board, who will run the businesses, to bring their teams into the version 2 one, because in version 1, some of them were participating. So now we want to get everybody in the boat on the board, everybody in the boat on the tab, our technology advisory board, get their teams involved in version 2. So we really hit this one really with, the punch it needs. Because, version ones are always, just the minimal viable, get something out, and it's the first time, so it's hard. But I think version 2 is where it really hits. See, we saw that SD-WAN. We came out with 70, and 70 is pretty good. 70.1 is awesome. 70.2 that's going to click on next going to be more awesome. So.
And there was very much the same problem with SD-WAN, where, if we went back to, 2017 or so, everyone had something that they called SD-WAN. What it actually did in terms of, services that you could buy were very different for a long time. And it seems to me that you guys have very much succeeded there, that the industry has very much coalesced on, this is what the sine qua non of an SD-WAN service really is. Do you think you've seen that success with that, basically?
We're seeing it, and I think SASE is the one that pulls it all together, because people are very confused about SASE.
And that SASE and SD-WAN, in my view, and I'd like to hear yours, are inextricably linked, really. Do you share that view?
Yeah. So, SSE, Secure Service Edge, and SD-WAN together are SASE. So SSE and SD-WAN, the combination is SASE. So absolutely. So what we're doing now is we're also delivering certification. We're doing certification on SD-WAN, but now we're also going to do certification on SASE and Zero Trust. Now, let's face it, you can't do a one-time certification and say you're secure. That doesn't work. Right. So we're now going into a continuous certification model, and this is really tough to figure this out, because everybody agrees that it's the right thing to do, but it's always about the cost, because it's a cost. Like, if at any time you can, if SASE is a cloud deployment of security at the cloud, and so if it's cloud by nature, it's going to rev, its services and bits and features every 2 weeks to a month. So every time you're revving, changing, you need to test and certify. And so that's an expensive process. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we do that in an economical way for our members?
Yeah, very different than, say, SD-WAN, where with SD-WAN, the elements of it, networking elements, basically always stay the same. With security, the threat landscape is constantly changing, and so the answer to the threat landscape is constantly changing.
That is totally exactly. And also, we also think that certification is not really being out there. That we want to change certification, not to say, oh, you're conforming to MEF protocols or MEF standards. We want to actually have our certification say, oh, well, we're also testing in the face of impairments, or WAN impairments. Did it recover right? Did it, in these kind of applications that are really encrypted and try to hide themselves, did it really classify right? Because you need to have your heuristics and all kinds of, AI, ML kinds of engines to actually even classify some of these things now. And then the other one is, like on SSE, like, did it really protect my threats? Did it really, if I throw a million different threats or, evasions or exploits, did it really protect? Did it get through or didn't get through? You know what I mean? So that's a hard thing to do, because it's a massive database. Like, I think 1 million per month are coming in, and it's only as good as the last time you ran it. And so you either run it every day, or you run it every time you're doing a change to your service, and then you run it. And so we're giving out certification badges on that. It has, the version, the date, what was tested, and scorecards and things like that. So we're still working through it. It's very complex, actually.
Indeed. Yes. I think everybody agrees with that without a doubt. Right. So the end users and the service providers have been trying to figure out sort of exactly what all of this means. And, I should say all of this is driven by the fact that the network itself has changed so much over the last few years, with cloud adoption, with local internet breakouts, and all of those, different things to make this necessary. It's not like, this is very much, we've had cases certainly in all kinds of IT before, of a solution in search of a problem. I think it's very much the opposite of that, right? So you have, there are a lot of real identifiable problems out there that we're working on solutions to.
Absolutely.
So Pascal, I want to circle back on one thing you mentioned kind of in passing about your work at MEF on SD-WAN. And that's on interoperability. I wonder if you could flesh that out a little more. And I'll preface it by saying, I talk to end users a lot. And I mean, really, in the top 3 pain points from a network manager's perspective are mergers and acquisitions, bringing in other companies that had other networks and all of that. Does SD-WAN interoperability help with that kind of situation where you have to merge extant networks together?
Yep, that's exactly right. It's the goal was with interop would be all the different vendors would agree to a minimal interop.
Hmm.
On the data plane side, so they would use IPsec. In the control plane, they use BGP. You
Hmm.
know, in the telemetry plane, they would use. We've got a spec called 105, which measures performance for SD-WAN, and then for the management plane, we worked out, how the different managers from each company would have to talk to each other. You know,
Hmm.
and so the goal is that you could deploy all these various vendors, and they would all be able to still plug in and talk to each other
Right.
and
Right.
not be islands of each other. And so that's the work. It's been long in the drawing, but we've got lots of stuff done. I think we're on the
Hmm.
management plane now, and we're almost, I think it'll be out by the end of next year. So.
Excellent. All right. Yeah, I know that there's a lot of people hoping for that, right? So I think that's good to hear. And just the last thing, one of the last things I want to touch on, Pascal, is around something that we mentioned before, but in terms of that fear that's always been there on the service provider side of becoming a commodity, right? We're seeing most of the service providers in the WAN enterprise kind of space have gotten on board with this idea that the world is moving toward internet as a connectivity of first resort in many cases, and that comes with the need to have an SD-WAN service, to have a SASE service, a full stack. Obviously through partners in both of those cases. But from your view of working with all of these providers, both from those vendors, right, the security vendors, SD-WAN vendors, and the carriers alike, how is this going to help the carriers sort of get out of that danger of becoming a commodity like they always fear, and to generating revenue for the carriers that are offering these services to, basically anything from an SME to the largest corporation in the world?
Yeah, so they have to be the first stop and shop
Hmm.
for the enterprise, and basically they represent the whole ecosystem in the back as a
Right.
retail provider. And to do that, they have to have new services than just connectivity. So if the internet's the first mile connection, so they provide that, okay, or with a partner or whatever. They need
Right.
to make sure it's, internet's getting faster and faster. The loops are getting faster. That's not a problem.
Hmm.
They hit the nearest edge, which would be, down the block or just, in the city, somewhere in your city. Um, and then once they get there, they get all the services of SD-WAN, they get cybersecurity, they get edge computing for loading in some very low latency digital transformation use cases that developers can
Hmm.
load in. So an IS MEC. And then they would also have um, multi-cloud. So from there, they can go to all the clouds in very high-speed pipes and not use the internet, and go to
Hmm.
all kinds of clouds: SaaS clouds, PaaS clouds, IaaS clouds, hyperscaler clouds, technology vendor clouds. It's all clouds, you
Right.
know. So it's a software-defined, cloud interconnect model, and it's basically, they just basically, and so they're the broker to all clouds, including
Hmm.
private data centers or hybrid private clouds. And so I think what you're saying is service providers become the broker to go to every destination, internet included, but mainly clouds of all sorts.
Right.
And they scrub through that to make sure things that performs right. They scrub to make sure it's secure. They scrub, making the application objectives and things like that. So I think that's the value.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think, and then we're describing this now as a secure network as a service, that we're going to be taking all our automation, all of our underlay work, all, carry Ethernet and internet and all that stuff, all of our overlay work, SD-WAN slicing, all of our cybersecurity work, SASE, zero trust, and now multi-cloud. We've been working on MEC IaaS, and now adding in, how do we connect to technology provider clouds, SOC clouds, all the different clouds using the same APIs.
Right.
That is, it's not like we've changed anything technical, but it's all coming together as one big package that the
Hmm.
industry seems to be wanting to move to and buy. So.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting because it seems so anarchic, right? When you pull back, it's like even just the basic internet. It's always been a network of private networks. Essentially, there's someone who, I think that I agree with that viewpoint that the opportunity for the carriers is to sort of bring organization to this chaos, because the truth is, there are certainly multinational companies out there outside of the telecom world that have very large network teams. I think that's a minority, right? You very often have a surprisingly small group of people who are working on the IT infrastructure WAN team at multinationals that now have to manage this much bigger set of problems, it seems to me. But that comes with this amazing opportunity too, with digital transformation and IoT and MEC and a lot of the things you've been talking about, for the network to be this important part of the business, rather than just something that has to be in an abstraction in the background. It's enabling new technologies and innovation on the business side. So I think it's really exciting times.
Yeah, and I think one more thing I should add to that is more and more of these service providers are now being tasked by the hyperscalers to provision intra cloud networking, meaning
Mm.
the VPCs, the VNets have to be configured inside the cloud, and it's
Hmm.
complex. And
Right.
so if a customer says, "Hey, I've got these regions all over the world, and I need to connect to all these places," it's not just connecting to the clouds; it's connect the clouds and then connecting all the VPCs and VNets and putting in the BGP routing policies and the gateways and the security policies and
Right.
inside that hyperscaler's cloud, which
Hmm.
someone has to provision it. Normally it would be
Right.
the enterprise, but now the service provider is saying, "Well, we'll do that for you too." Another
Right.
big opportunity is what I call cloud intra networking.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So I get, I say this a lot on the show and in my life in general, but it's what we call the cloud is just the piece that we're not talking about right at that very moment, right? It's the abstraction beyond, but you're saying that the opportunity for the carriers extends all the way into that sort of east west, if you will, within the cloud itself, right?
Within the cloud, yeah, exactly, because it's very
Hmm.
complex to configure clouds, and
Right.
so there's opportunities for providers to take that expertise and do that. So that it's no more just about having copper or fiber anymore. It's what do I put on top of that copper fiber? How much value can I wrap
Hmm.
around it?
Right.
And the value keeps going. We talked about a lot of that value, and the value can go up the stack higher and higher and higher. And
Hmm.
so basically, if a hyperscaler is making a dollar, then there's some part of that dollar that can go back to the telecom provider, which is not just on bandwidth. It's about all the
Right, not
managed,
not just the 400G bandwidth
yeah,
between data center A and B, right? But yeah,
but all the value they add on top of that gives them more margins to the telecom operator, and hyperscalers don't have to deal with all of that operationalizing and
right.
managing all that because for scale, tens of millions of customers, they have to have channels.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. All right, so Pascal, I want to wrap us up with maybe a big question here, but just how do you see all of this playing out over the next say 3 to 5 years? Right? Are we going to get to this portal world where we can go on and spin something up immediately, or change our policies and all of that? How do you see it materializing in terms of a timescale?
Yeah, well, I've been 6 years, so it was a lot of work to get to the automation aspects and
Yeah.
to even think about how to standardize SD-WAN and SASE. I think in 5 6 years we will see digital transformational use cases come in that
Hmm.
will drive networks in a very different way.
Right.
I think will we see connected vehicles and really on the roads driving by themselves? Probably not yet, but
Hmm.
it's going for
Hmm.
laws. But the industrial side, all the smart manufacturing, the smart cities, and the smart warehouses and everything that wants to digitally transform the analog processes and workflow process to digitally is going to drive requirements, especially IoT
Right.
devices. And I think that is going to put a better demand, a much more different demand than our business applications
Hmm.
to the cloud. And I think that's why edge computing is coming in. 5G will play a significant role. I think if 5G can deliver a wire-like experience using wireless technology and be flawless, then that's going to play a very significant part, whether it be private
Especially
5G.
with slicing
That's and with
over
slicing,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, with
Hmm.
slicing with it. So So whether that be private or public 5G, I don't really care. There's all use cases in that. I think, all of that has to be coordinated through automation. Automation is the horizontal layer through all of this, because you cannot have people.
Right.
I think what I think in 5 to 7 years, you are going to see the advent of newer types of digital transformational use cases that drives the network in a different behavior. Like smart glasses haven't come in yet, but smart glasses will absolutely drive networks in a very different behavior than what we used to just, business IT.
Right.
So I think that's the radical change I see, and no one really understands what that looks like. We've seen some smart houses, we've seen some smart cities. We're getting a little bit of a people connected car,
but they are always in the same place for one thing, right? So,
yeah. And I think when you look at the metaverse, you see Web 3.0 and blockchains and decentralized IDs or self-sovereign IDs. These are all things that are still emerging out. As you can see, Facebook's even having challenges trying to get to understanding. They're great for all kind of consumer-oriented things, but to get them into the business side,
right,
is where I think people are trying to figure out. But I've listened to a lot of use cases about some of these commercial aspects of digital transformation. I'm like, wow, like in airports or stadiums, and go, these are just actually really great use cases. So I think we're transforming the world to be all digital in our workflows. And when that happens in the next 10 years, the networks will be very, very important, and security has to be there. And we have to be able to be better than the bad guys.
Right,
and
right.
we just got to have this thing working flawless, because you get a hiccup, things just fall apart. So.
No, I think that's a great point. I'm as an analyst looking forward to watching that unfold, but especially I like the way that you put it with some specific examples that we're thinking about, sort of these wired or wireless connections all over the world all the time, but what do they mean for people, for businesses, for consumers? That I think that's where it gets really interesting. So that's going to be fun to watch. All right, Pascal, it's been really interesting. Thank you very much. Before we take off, is there any way that folks out there can keep up with you and what you're doing at MEF?
It's a couple of ways. You can go to MEF.net, MEF.net, and you can look at all our website. I have a podcast too. I should interview it, called Executives at the Edge. And we interview executives about all kinds of trends and what's going on there. And then I think, join MEF is probably the other one.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So if you join MEF, you'll see all the work we're doing. We do lots of projects. We're trying to really solve a lot of these issues. So, in my view, leaving this one statement, if I look at planes, they fly in the sky, but they are incredibly precise. Because if they aren't, then they start falling out of the sky.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be the day where digital transformational use cases has to have networks that are incredibly precise. They have to have security that's incredibly precise, cybersecurity. They cannot have malware coming in. Everything will be destroyed. So it's like we don't our utilities of water, or electricity. Most of our water, at least in North America, is clean. It's free of pathogens. It flows right. I always use the analogy. That's kind of what we want to strive to in networking. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. All right. So everybody listening, check out Executives at the Edge. And I hope that we can talk again sometime, Pascal.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thanks. Thanks for listening. Telegeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at Telegeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com, and we'll see you on the internet.